said she
Can you hear
just
me all right?
remembered that she's leaving on the
No,
26th. I said she was Tom Sawyer.
Rosemary
Bait
Hill.
and switch.
Oh, it's on now.
Yeah.
It's on.
He's taking care of it, don't worry about it.
Okay. I'm Corinne Salcedo. Barbara Cooper made the coffee, help yourself anytime. Rita Sullivan made the cookies. She makes cookies every time. She's also going to pass the hat tonight. We are an independent Democratic club. I'm going to explain because we have a lot of new people here tonight. We are not affiliated with Washington State Democrats or Skagit County Democrats, but we're really friendly with them. But we're independent, so we don't have to charge dues, write bylaws, report to the PDC or anything. We just do what we want, and it seems to work out really well. So after you sign in, then that means you're a member. So it's very affordable and easy to join. Are there any public officials or candidates?
I'm a candidate, but I'm also speaking.
You're a candidate now, I didn't know.
I'm running for hospital commission.
Oh,
County Hospital Commission.
in Wacom. Okay, there was a couple more I was expecting, but they're not here yet. And how about Democratic Party officials? No, we have outgoing ones, but not any new ones. Liz Lovelet wanted to come, but she's meeting with the firefighters tonight, seeking an endorsement from them. And I brought yard signs. She had her campaign kickoff last night. So I brought yard signs from that. They're at the back there. So if you want one, just take it home, put it up.
And
And
if you want one another time, 2510 M Avenue, they're by my garage.
did you hear that? 2510, it's M Avenue. It's on the corner of 25th and M, leaning up against the garage. Signs for Liz and for other candidates too, right, Hattie?
Right, as they come in.
Yeah, just take them. And Patty has other campaign stuff on the table back there. Now, and I want to pass around a sign-up sheet for, I'll tell you what it is before I pass it, for a Get Out the Vote canvas event, Saturday, July 20th. It's going to be in Anacortes, but it'll also be in Burlington, Mount Vernon, Cedar Woolley, led by our field organizer, Alex Del Rosario. And it'll be from 12 to 4, and we'll meet at Bob Dahl's house. I can give you all that information after you sign up. So I'll pass it around if you'd like to sign up. It'll be really fun.
Corinne, we have two candidates. Corinne, two candidates now walked in.
Yep,
Oh, Carolyn, I didn't see Carolyn.
Oh, I
So-
have a job and I close 5 minutes early.
So this is Sarah Holohan. Do you want to come up here to introduce yourself?
Everybody knows me, right?
Well, there's a lot of new people tonight.
Wonderful, thank you. Hi, I'm Sarah Holohan. I lived here 20 years. I'm running for City Council, Ward 2. Is this what we're talking about? Or would you like to know about, it's 78 degrees and I work at the Anacortes Food Co-op and it's really hot in there. But yeah, I think it's really important that we have a really strong environmentalist on City Council. So hope you will consider voting for me. Thank you.
And we also have Carolyn Moulton. Would you like to come up as well?
Sure. See, I ride my bike.
My name's Carolyn Moulton, and I was appointed by the Anacortes City Council in April. Something. Does that sound weird? Okay. To fill the seat vacated by our current Senator Lovelet. And so this November, this season, I'm running to retain my seat. And the things that I'm most excited about are increasing affordable housing options in our town. Non-motorized transportation is a big one for me. Also, downtown businesses, local businesses. So those are my driving passions. But there's a lot of other stuff going on that I'm digging into. I'm on the Public Works Committee, so I can't wait to find out more about infrastructure. That's going to be a big learning curve, but very important. So anyway, I hope you would vote for me, and any questions you have at any time, feel free to contact me by email. You can find my email on the city website. And yeah, I'd love to hear from my constituents, so thanks so much.
Okay. Then a couple more things to tell you. I just learned late afternoon today that Skagit County Democrats is going to have an endorsement meeting at the PUD on Sunday, June 23rd at 1 o'clock. You can hear the candidates speak, and then if you're a member, a paid member, then you can vote on the endorsements. So that'll be fun. And then Tuesday, July 9th, we will have a candidates forum here just for the 40th District Senate race. So just the 4 candidates, Liz Lovelet, Daniel Miller, Carrie Blackwood, and Greta Aitken are the 4 candidates. So that's here. You'll get an invitation. All right, so now I want to introduce our speaker, Morgan Steele Dykeman. She lives in unincorporated Skagit County in the Alger area. She has a BA in Political Science and American History. She is the Legislative Affairs Manager for NARAL Pro-Choice Washington. She's been organizing for the reproductive freedom movement since 2011 in North Carolina. Previously, she worked as campaign managers for Fuse Washington, as field organizer for Hillary for New Hampshire, and as the Affordable Care Act implementation specialist for Planned Parenthood in North New England. Other activities, she's on the e-board of the Riveters Collective. And she was Social Action Chair for King County Young Democrats. Please welcome Morgan, and hold your questions until she's finished speaking.
It's okay if I sit here, Corinne? Sure. All right. Can you hear me?
Pull it in close.
Can you hear me now? Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you. I love any chance I get to come to Anacortes. Y'all have it good here. It is so beautiful. I just came, I grabbed a little snack at the Secret Cove bar. Oh, what a view.
Yeah.
Anyways, back to business. So I'm the Legislative Affairs Manager for NARAL Pro-Choice Washington. If you haven't heard of us before, NARAL is an acronym. It stands for National Abortion Rights Action League. And we are a national organization. The Washington State affiliate is independent, but we do work, we develop policy in partnership with our national org. So what I'm going to do tonight is talk about a little bit about my story in getting involved in the movement, because I think it's indicative of what's happening these days across the country. I'm going to talk about the national landscape, which I'm sure is on the top of many of our minds in light of the abortion bans happening across the South. And I'm going to talk about Washington State and our positionality within that landscape. And then I'm also going to talk about Northwest Washington and what we can do right here in our own backyards on the issue of reproductive freedom. So I went to college in North Carolina in 2010. We were 2 years into the Obama administration, the good years, do you remember? And that fall, I don't know if you remember, but 2010, there was a red wave midterm election. And it wasn't just Republicans, it was Tea Party, radical right-wing politicians taking over state legislatures across the country. And North Carolina was one of those. And so overnight, I had arrived in North Carolina thinking I was coming to the most progressive state in the South, and woke up the next day in one of the more radical states in the South. and it stayed that way. The first thing they did, as you can imagine, was come after women's rights. They decided to pass a mandatory ultrasound for someone seeking an abortion, a mandatory 2-day waiting period, as though adults can't make their own health decisions, right? Mandatory parental notification for minors seeking abortion, regardless of the fact that many minors seeking abortion are victims of incest and rape. So all of these really unethical bills that I knew would harm me as a woman and my community, coming from a community of young people for whom an unplanned pregnancy without access to the full spectrum of reproductive care could ruin their collegiate career, right? So I organized. And I was in Asheville, North Carolina. Have y'all heard of Asheville? A little hippie town. But it's still in the rural South, and we organized a 1,000-person march through the streets after the Tea Party proposed these bans. And that was my first involvement in politics, which was pretty cool. Except that it didn't work, because rallies don't always create good policies, right? We know that if you've been in the game for a while, although they are fun. So I thought to myself, what more can I do? And when President Obama proposed the Affordable Care Act and we got it passed, birth control was a part of that. And it said, being a woman is not a pre-existing condition. Health insurance companies have to cover birth control as a part of preventative care. Really common sense stuff that didn't exist before. And I said, I want to be a part of that. So I joined the team at Planned Parenthood and worked to implement the Affordable Care Act. What was this policy going to look like in the everyday lives of people who were on Medicaid? And that was really eye-opening because there were still gaps. The Affordable Care Act wasn't affordable for all of us. And so I thought, okay, if the policy is what needs to change and the people we elect write the policy, then I need to change the people we're electing. And so I got into politics. And so that's how I'm here today. And like Corrine said, thank you for the introduction. I've been in Washington for 4 years working on campaigns and elections, and joined the team at NARAL this past December as the Legislative Affairs Manager. So NARAL Pro-Choice Washington, we are the leading grassroots advocacy organization on reproductive freedom issues. We don't have a health center like Planned Parenthood does. We don't provide direct services. We exist solely for the purpose of protecting this constitutional right, the right to access the full spectrum of reproductive care. And we have 35,000 members from Seattle to Spokane, everywhere in between, including several thousand in Northwest Washington, which I'm particularly proud of. We do elections, we support pro-choice candidates at all levels of government, and we try to pass policies that protect and expand the right to access abortion. So that's a little bit about me, a little bit about who I work for. Let's get into the juicy stuff and talk about the national landscape. Who is so angry at the Trump administration? Yeah, everybody. I am. And I'll say, when Trump got elected, the first thing on many of our minds was the Supreme Court. What was going to happen to the Supreme Court with a radical right-wing nutcase in office in the White House. And the worst, besides, like, God bless Ruth Bader Ginsburg and protect her, but so far the worst has happened. And we have radical anti-choice pro-lifers on the Supreme Court. This has been part of a Republican scheme over the past several decades to stack the courts with the clear intention of overturning Roe versus Wade. So this didn't just happen overnight. This was a really devious strategy that we've been unsuccessfully pushing back against for tens of years. We are now facing the highly likely overturning of Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court decision that secured the right to abortion in our country. And in addition to that, it's our belief that a post-Roe America will not be the same as a pre-Roe America. It's going to be worse, because these states that are banning abortion, what we're seeing is they're not stopping at making it illegal. They're criminalizing people who provide and seek the service. So you might have seen when Alabama passed their law, they said anyone who provides an abortion is going to get 99 years in jail. And I saw a graphic that put that side by side to the mandatory minimum for someone who commits sexual assault. The minimum for sexual assault is 5 years in jail. The minimum for providing a life-saving healthcare service that's guaranteed in the Constitution, 99 years. So we already know that Roe is on the rocks. Without it, we're going to be worse off than we were before. And what we were before, some of you might remember, was pretty bad. So the national landscape is a little scary right now in terms of reproductive freedom. Luckily, we live in Washington. In Washington, the voters have affirmed time and time again that abortion is a human right. And we codified Roe versus Wade in our law in 1992. So even if Roe versus Wade is overturned at the national level, here in Washington, the right is protected for our residents. And go Washington! Just another example of how important elections are and putting the right people in office, right? So that's pretty great. We also have, last year we passed the Reproductive Parity Act, which said if a health insurance plan covers maternity care, it also has to cover birth control and abortion. Super important. And that expanded access for so many people in our state. Because in a state that has codified Roe, the biggest barriers to accessing abortion care are financial and bureaucratic. It's the red tape you have to snip through, and it's the money to pay for it. And not everyone has that. But lucky for us, with the Reproductive Parity Act passed last year, once we got a Democratic majority in the Senate, we don't have to worry about that anymore. So it's pretty awesome. The other thing we passed last year, and I focus on last year because we had a Republican majority in the Senate for many years before that, and many Democrats in office wanted to appease the Republicans in order to pass important bills. They wanted to make compromises. And you can understand why that would be important. But think of how much progress we've made now that we have Democratic majorities in both houses. It's pretty awesome. So last year we passed 12 months birth control. You can walk into a clinic, say you're a student or you're a working mom who travels a lot or rents, you have to move around a lot. With 12-month birth control on the books, you can walk into a clinic and get 12 packs of birth control pills in one day, and you're good. You don't have to worry about going back to the doctor for the rest of the year. So that's revolutionary for poor women in our state. So we made a lot of progress last year. This year, we also made some progress. Some of the biggest barriers to accessing reproductive health care in our state, like I said, are bureaucratic. And that's even more true if you are someone with oppressed identities. So undocumented people, for example, can't, because of federal restrictions, if you aren't a citizen, you can't get on public health insurance, right? Well, that blocks them from accessing any kind of health insurance, even in our state, for accessing birth control or family planning services. So that's a barrier. Additionally, for the LGBTQ community, it's Pride Month, 30% of trans people in Washington state report being straight up discriminated against in a reproductive health care setting, where they'll walk in and a doctor will refuse to treat them because they have prejudice, or the insurance company will refuse to cover their services. because they will say, so say a patient is a trans man, born with female anatomy, but is a man, identifies as a man. On their paperwork, they might need a hysterectomy for cervical cancer or what have you. The insurance company could say, we don't provide that service for men, so we're not going to pay for it. And what happens is trans people are increasingly burdened with medical debt. In working on this issue, I've met 3 separate people, trans people, who had to file medical bankruptcy because of this issue, because health insurance companies refuse to pay. So in our eyes at NARAL, we said, that seems fixable. Just tell the insurance companies to straighten things out. And so we passed a law this year that was called the Reproductive Health Access for All, which said it bolstered anti-discrimination legislation protecting trans and queer folks so that they can get the health care they need and no doctor or health insurance company can turn them away. So that was a huge, huge success this year. Thank you. Even with our progressive majority, we struggled to pass 2 of our legislative priorities this year. One of them was addressing that issue where undocumented people can't access health insurance for family planning. We were able to fund that in the budget, which is great. It's a step forward, but that money will have to be renegotiated again and again by a community that's scared to come out in the open right now. So we really wanted to see that put into statute next year. So if you're keeping track of action items that we're working on, if you see Liz Lovelet or Deb Luckanoff, you can ask them about, it's called the Take Charge Look Like, Family Planning Health Insurance for Undocumented People. The other bill that did not pass this year that you may have been more likely to hear about was sex ed, sexual health education. So I'm not from here. I was extremely surprised to learn that in a progressive state like Washington, sexual health education is not mandatory. And school district by school district, they can choose whether or not to educate their kids about a fundamental part of their health care. And so we worked on a bill in partnership with Planned Parenthood and the Office of the, OSPI, Superintendent of Public Schools. We worked on a bill that would require every school district to provide sexual health education that included a bare minimum that met a bare minimum of requirements. One of those was that it was based in evidence. Because sexual health education is not mandatory in Washington, we don't know if someone in Grant County, Moses Lake, Washington, is teaching kids that, if you have sex before you're married, you'll grow hair on your palms. We don't know. But this law would have said, you have to teach evidence-based sexual health education. What medically is actually happening in pregnancy and how do we actually prevent pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections. The second piece of the sex ed bill was that it would require LGBTQ affirming information about gender identity. And this is based on studies that have shown things as simple as saying boys can be dancers and girls can like sports drastically reduces suicide among LGBTQ youth. Super important, really simple to take 30 minutes out of a day to teach this. So we were excited about that. And the third thing that it would teach was consent. What does consent look like? And what can you do to prevent sexual assault and harassment? And the superintendent of public schools described the sexual assault crisis in our public schools as a crisis, as a disaster. 1 in 4 girls in our schools reports experiencing assault or harassment, which is too many. And this would have taught kids that no one gets to touch you unless you want them to, which is pretty important. Sadly, this bill did not pass. and I'll give you my personal and professional opinion as to why. The opposition to this bill out-organized us. When the bill had a hearing, they showed up in busloads to say they would not have their kids taught sexual health education in school. The bill did say that a parent can individually pull their kid out of the class. It's not going to make any kid be in the class. But they were spreading misinformation and getting riled up about things that weren't true about how sex ed works, and legislators got scared. So if you're taking notes on things we can do now, supporting our champions that it's okay to stand strong on this issue, that we have their backs for supporting evidence-based education would make a huge difference. And yeah, so I would encourage you. Sex ed failed this year, even with Democratic majority in both houses. I think we can do better next year. So that's the national landscape. I'll quickly run through the local landscape and some local issues that you have power over that you can impact, and then I'll take questions. So here in Northwest Washington, and basically in any part of Washington that's outside of the Seattle metro area, we face really similar, all those regions face really similar issues outside of Seattle. The first is that our hospitals are majority Catholic and Christian affiliated. This is a really tricky issue because in rural communities, especially, that don't have a lot of funds to attract a non-religious institution, we don't really have a choice. If a Catholic hospital says, I'll come to your community and I'll provide life-saving care. The downside is that they will blanket refuse to provide abortion care, sometimes, in ways that can permanently affect a person's life. Speaking from experience, in 2016, I was suspected to have a brain tumor, and I had to go off birth control, and I got pregnant by accident. And when I went to my primary care provider, who was at Swedish Hospital in Seattle, which I didn't know was a Catholic health institution, they don't advertise it, right? I said, I can't have a kid right now, we're just starting our careers, can you help me figure out how I can access abortion care? And she said, we're pro-life, I can't help you. Kicked me out of her office. And I couldn't get into a Planned Parenthood for 2 weeks. And when I finally did, they told me it was an ectopic pregnancy. So that's however many weeks. If you don't know what an ectopic is, it's when an embryo attaches outside of the uterus, usually in a fallopian tube, and it can be fatal. It can kill you. And if it doesn't kill you, it can be extremely painful and ruin your ability to have kids in the future. So I thought it was pretty ironic that a pro-life doctor was putting at risk my ability to have kids in the future. But that's the way that these hospitals operate. Even if the doctor herself had been pro-choice, she would have gotten fired if she gave me that referral. So we need to think about it. In Mount Vernon, in Bellingham, we have Peace Health, right? That's the hospital here, correct? Am I?
Island Hospital. We have Island Hospital, it's okay.
Okay, good. Thank you. Sorry. Still learning.
Yeah. We fought them joining the peace bill.
Woo! Go you! Very nice.
Mount Vernon isn't Peace Health either.
Okay, thank you.
They dropped out of that.
Oh, good. Okay, well, up in Bellingham, we'll say, where there's a college, right? A big state school with lots of girls who maybe don't understand or have access to full range of health insurance or health care options, might show up and say, I need birth control, and be declined because of this. So, huge issue outside of the Seattle area. And we're still trying to figure out ways to hold them accountable that won't entice them to threaten to leave. Because what's worse than having a hospital that doesn't provide the full spectrum of reproductive care is having no hospital at all. But that doesn't mean we should have to compromise. So we're still figuring that out. But that's a huge issue. And good for you. I'm glad to hear that you fought them joining with Peace Health.
They're the only hospital that listened.
Yeah. The other local issue, does anyone know what a crisis pregnancy center is? Yeah. So you've probably seen these, either ads in the newspaper or billboards, or even driving down Main Street. Crisis pregnancy centers are fake clinics. They advertise that they'll provide free pregnancy tests, when really they are almost entirely run by volunteers who have no medical background or certification. And they will go through the whole shebang. They will wear lab coats, white lab coats. They will take your blood pressure. They'll weigh you, and they'll give you a pregnancy test to lead you to believe that they are medical professionals. And then they will bully you and coerce you into keeping an unwanted pregnancy. And we have stories, we've sent people undercover to these places, and people who weren't even pregnant. So they give them this pregnancy test, don't even look at the results, and then try to persuade them to keep a pregnancy that they don't have. But it's really extreme tactics, the sole goal of which is to force people to keep pregnancies. And you can imagine how, that in itself feels really insidious. Marketing yourself as a medical facility when you don't have medical staff or provide real medical services, that feels really insidious. But for people who are poor, working class, people who don't have a lot of time to jump through the hoops of their insurance or getting in with a primary care provider, people who don't speak English very well, students who don't want a visit to Planned Parenthood to come up on their parents' insurance, a free pregnancy test would sound really good, wouldn't it? So these are really dangerous. They do not support bodily autonomy, and we need to find a way to hold them accountable. One of the ideas that has been thrown around for a while has been putting a sign in the window that says, "This is not a medical facility." The city council could require that, right? And California did that. It was taken to the Supreme Court, who said it was a violation of First Amendment free speech rights. So trying to find other ways. I'm in the process of researching and happy to talk more in depth into my ideas, but that's an issue to be aware of. And certainly one of the things we can do to prevent people being trapped by crisis pregnancy centers is spread awareness of the real resources that exist. Tell people that they can get 12 packs of birth control in one visit. Tell people where the local Planned Parenthood is, that they can take the bus, That's something that we can do and that we can ask our local elected officials to invest in. So that's one of the big issues. So I'll open it up for questions. I feel like I just threw a lot of information at you. Thank you for listening. Okay, great.
Okay, so here's how we'll do it. Raise your hand, and then I'll call on you in order. She's already got one finger up. And just a sec. Say your name, because there are a lot of new people. We want to get to know you. And just one question at a time, because there's probably a lot of other people who have questions too. And then I can come back to you if you have more than one. Okay, who's first? Carol? Oh, and we'll bring the mic to you.
My name's Carol Sullivan, Morgan, and I'm not really familiar with your group, so I'm learning the acronyms words, the real words, for the first time. But I'm wondering if, like some of the other organizations that deal with environment and voting rights and healthcare, do you have, and you're the legislative person, do you send out a newsletter during the legislative session that lists the bills that you're supporting and what kind of action you'd like from people in the community?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Carol. So we do send out a newsletter year-round, but especially in the legislative session.
Okay, so you said newsletter. Is it available online then?
Yeah, you would have to go to the website and sign up to receive it, but it's I can write the website up on the board too, if that's helpful, so people can write it down. It's prochoicewashington.org.
Okay, so that it would be in the legislative session, it would deal with Washington state legislative actions, but what about the rest of the year? Now, things that are happening nationally, do you keep track of those as well?
Yeah, we do keep track. Like I said, we're the state affiliate of a national organization. So because Washington, I forget if I mentioned this, but Washington is on the forefront. States like Alabama look to us to see what the flip side of that coin could look like. And so when there is, I think she wants to hand that. When there is an action happening in another state, they might call on us to say, put out the bat signal. Washingtonians, call Alabama voters and tell them it's time to act. So yeah, so there's opportunities for national stuff. Like I said, we're really involved in local elections. One of the things that we talk about in the newsletter during election season, one of the things that's more important than ever in the era of Trump is for Democrats to not remain silent on this issue. Silence gives Trump and his trumpeteers a bigger bullhorn. And standing up and saying, I'm pro-choice and it's okay to be pro-choice makes a huge difference, not just at the national level or in Congress, but here in Anacortes and across the state. Thank you, Carol.
What's next? Rita's gonna pass the hat. Oh, I thought I'd see a lot of hands going up. Marshall.
I'm not scary, I promise.
Oh, I'm not intimidated in the least. My name is Marshall Goldberg. For those who don't know me, I have quite a history that I'm going to share with you, but I really appreciate your presentation. The last time I checked, I was a member of the national and the state organization of NARAL Pro-Choice. And the reason is NARAL is focused on this privacy right. I'm a retired OBGYN physician, okay? And I was in the minority, I provided complete OBGYN services.
Yay! Thank you.
And I did it for 35 years. And to be cognizant of what things were like before January 22nd, 1973, and watch the changes that are happening now are really troubling to me. And I agree with you, if we go back, it's not going to be the same. What was interesting about my training in 1973 is when I started my residency in July 1st, 1973. And it was the first time that the residents were required to learn first and second trimester termination techniques. It was the first time it was part of their clinical training. And the one thing I remember from the residents that preceded me, it was also the first time in their training they had never taken care of a septic abortion or seen someone die, get very sick and die because of a botched septic abortion. And that means a lot to me. So I accept it as just being part of the normal service that you provide women. Women need care, they need help over here, they need help over there. Why not do it? I did not have any moral, ethical reservations about it. Because I was looking at the faces of the women who needed the service and listened to their stories, and they all were right on. They were doing what was best for them. But that being said, my career also included 2 years as medical director for Planned Parenthood in Memphis. So part of my job there was to lead an organization that was committed to reproductive health care, and that was one of the best times of my life. And but I heard stories, and I want to just mention one thing. Before 1973, women did all sorts of things to seek abortion services. Most of the time, the services were provided by unscrupulous, untrained medical, not even medical professionals, somebody who just wore a white coat. And what was really tragic, for me, I used to go to Planned Parenthood national meetings. I didn't realize that one of the things that happened to a lot of women back then is that they were threatened. It wasn't just a matter of getting the money together. They would get to the facility or to the office or wherever it was, and their abortionist would tell them, okay, I'll do you, but you've got to do something for me. And almost invariably that meant that they had to submit to being raped. Most people don't know this. This is one of the most tragic, untold stories about abortion in the pre-Roe v. Wade era. And I'm fearful that that will happen again. The other thing I want to say, and I could talk a lot, but I'll say just one more thing. Abortion is about women and women's rights and so on. But the most important thing it's about control. In societies that don't have access to abortion, where women are destined to become pregnant year after year after year, and are saddled with pregnancies and raising children that they might not want otherwise, they lose status, they become second-class citizens. And I want people to remember one more factoid, and I could give a lecture, is that in Nazi Germany, they outlawed abortion. If you want to know about fascism and how fascism takes hold, and in this country we could argue perhaps that we are seeing elements of fascism today, one of the first things you do is you outlaw reproductive health choices. So with that, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. We should get coffee. Don't leave without letting me get your number.
I've got a card.
Okay, great. Wow, what a story.
I forgot to tell you that this young man is recording for KSDR Radio, the station at Skagit Valley College, for the program Speak Up, Speak Out, which is on social issues. And that Zane Butler is videotaping the meeting also. He's Rita's grandson, graduating from Anacortes High School next week. Okay, who's next?
Lenora.
Charlie, I think, and then Lenore, and somebody over there.
Yeah, I have a question. Yeah, my name is Charlie Wilson, and there has been, it seems, this abortion issue is viewed as a black and white kind of thing. It's one or the other. It's either total or no abortion allowed. But isn't there a middle ground? And I also believe that there's a moral component to this question as well, and I'd like you to address that.
Certainly. So this won't be the answer you're looking for, I think, but to us as NARAL Pro-Choice Washington, there is not a gray area. It is the decision of if, when, and how to carry a child into life is extremely personal and the decision of the carrier alone. And so, yeah. So I'm afraid that would be my response. And as far as moral arguments go, we see folks raise the issue of, for example, what they're calling fetal heartbeat bills, where they say, if the embryo has a heartbeat, then you shouldn't be able to terminate the pregnancy, when that's scientifically not quite accurate description of what's happening in the uterus. But also, you know who else has heartbeats? Mexican children in cages on the Texas border. Black teenagers walking down the street to buy Skittles at the store. Anyone who's breathing toxic air and drinking poison water because the government won't regulate pollution by corporations. And so I think the moral argument against abortion is not, to me, not valid in light of the way that pro-life folks ignore very large swaths of humanity. And also, I think we're just not willing to compromise, and I think it's super important today to stand strong on that principle that the decision is personal and it's ours to make alone. So that's what I would say.
Robertson.
Hi, I'm Lenore Peterson. This is history night, I think. 1968, I was living in Montlake Terrace. There was no place where a woman who didn't have money to go to a doctor could go for birth control help, let alone consider a pregnancy they couldn't afford. I was an RN many, many years ago, and with a number of other people and a young doctor from the University of Washington, we started the first birth control clinic in Snohomish County in the training rooms of the fire station in Montlake Terrace. City councilmen called and said, "Do you think any woman would go to a public building for birth control?" But they did. They came from as far as, Stanwood, Monroe, in the snow, up over their knees. I remember a young Mexican, not so young Mexican woman who said, "You have to help me. I know I'll go to hell, but I can't afford any more babies, and I'm taking this one home to put in the only dresser drawer I can empty." We were also the first state in Washington, the first state in the United States to make abortion legal. Maybe some of you marched with us to make that happen. So where are we now? Can you believe we're going backwards? Nobody, I spoke in hundreds of schools and talked to hundreds of parents and kids and not so young women who didn't have access to birth control, let alone abortion. So somehow we have to get out and find a way to be human. Nobody can make those decisions for a person who, for whatever reason, finds herself pregnant if she's unable to take care of it. I haven't heard any offers to take care of those children that are not wanted and don't have parents that can afford them. It's not happening. They're still out there. Yes. So I'm 85 this year. I can't believe we're going backwards, and we are, but we're not going to stay there. But it takes hard work. So I'll be out there in the front row when you're marching.
Thank you, Lenore.
Okay, Barbara.
I'm going to take a couple of minutes and read something. This was written, I sent it into the paper. It's Sister Joan Chessiter. She's a Benedictine nun. And this is what she wrote. I do not believe that just because you're opposed to abortion, that makes you pro-life. In fact, I think in many cases your morality is deeply lacking if all you want is a child born, but not a child fed, not a child educated, not a child housed. And why would I think that you don't? Because you don't want any tax money to go there. That's not pro-life. That's pro-birth. We need a much broader conversation on what the morality of pro-life is. Personally, I think she says it all. And I think personally, I'm so tired of hearing I'm pro-life. Every time someone says that to me, I says, no, you're not. You're pro-birth. You don't give a rat's butt about this kid as soon as it's born. And I think we really need to just change the name. It's a great word, pro-life, but they're not. But I think some of you may know that every second Saturday in Mount Vernon in front of the Planned Parenthood, there's a rally. We usually get about 20 people. And I'd say most of the stuff is most of the people wave and yell and thank us. But we do get now yelled at and being called murderers. So that's what you're up against now is, and some of the people have stopped coming because they're afraid. They're afraid that they're going to get run over. Some crazy will go on the sidewalk and run us all over. So it's gotten a lot more scary. We do a rally here every Saturday from 12 to 1, and I always bring my, I support Planned Parenthood. And we have been called murderers now. That's what people who...
Sunday, Barbara.
Sunday, I'm sorry. Every Sunday from 12 to 1. And it's really can be a little scary, because if they think you're a murderer, you don't know what the outcome could be.
Y'all are bringing a tear to my eye.
Barbara's a nurse, everybody. Okay, there was somebody over here. Oh, it's Roger.
I was going to bring up that same article, by the way, and it was an excellent article, and I think the bottom line is that each and every one of us have got to be able to correct the person that we're talking to. So when they say pro-life, we say pro-birth. And the more it sounds awkward, it's real awkward, it's kind of funny at first, but the more you do it, the less awkward it is, and the more important it is, and the more people. I mean, that original article was hidden away in an alternative newspaper, and you know, now it's getting exposure, and it's 3 weeks later. So I think it's really important to make the difference between, or show the difference between pro-life and pro-birth.
Great idea.
Hi, my name's John. My name's John Morgan. I want to kind of expand on the pro-birth. I think it's more like forced birth. They're forcing you to have the baby. So there's no pro-woman thing going on at all. So yeah, I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Totally agree.
That was written by Catholic nuns.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment that I do think they're trying to defund Planned Parenthood, and they're probably the biggest organization to prevent unwanted pregnancies, so it's kind of ironic. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the background of why the Democratic woman governor of Alabama signed that bill, and also, is there anything Washingtonians can do to help people?
That's a great
In
question.
those states.
Yep, that's a great
Question. So I won't even try to pretend I know what the governor of Alabama was thinking, besides that it would get her more votes in the next election. I really can't even fathom why she would make that decision. But I will say there's plenty we can do now. The most important thing you can do is support the women of Alabama with your dollars. Now, abortion is obviously going to be illegal in the state of Alabama, so if they want one, they're going to have to go to a neighboring state. Those states have often also passed laws that say you have to show up at the clinic 3 days in a row before you can get the care that you need. You have to have your husband or parent sign for you. I don't think anyone is now says their husband has to sign for them, I hope, but people definitely have bills that say their parent has to sign for them. And so if there's no clinic in your state, you have to drive multiple hours, sometimes stay the night, pay for a taxi to and from a hotel if you don't have someone who will come with you. And so that adds up, right? And then also considering that some insurance doesn't cover out-of-state care, the costs just really add up. So the biggest way we can help women in states like Alabama and Missouri is donate to the abortion funds in those states. Every state has an abortion fund. We have one here to help women in similar situations called the Northwest Abortion Access Fund. I would encourage everyone to set up a recurring $5 donation to the Alabama fund. It's called the Yellow Hammer Fund, which is their state bird. And that will help fund the costs associated with getting an abortion when there isn't one available in your state. And that money will go directly to women who need it. So super good use of your money, highly recommend. And I think, honestly, I stand by my former statement that one of the greatest things we can do for our sister states who are suffering right now is be the beacon of hope. Let's not let Democrats in Washington put pro-choice on their name tag and then not pass pass sex ed. That doesn't make any sense to me. And I think we can push them to be the best versions of themselves, show them as voters, we'll support them no matter what. Ask them to go on the record about it. The more people we have coming out and saying, I support this, the harder it'll be for the pro-birthers to claim space in our public discourse. So that's what I would say, is we need to keep fighting here, show people what success can look like while sending our dollars, support in form of dollars, to the folks in Alabama.
Thank you. You've thought about all the questions. Okay, Patty had her hand up, and then there's more over there.
Hi, I'm Patty Santangelo, and a couple of things. When they say they're pro-life, ask them how many children they have adopted that have been born when they made them be born. And the other thing is, I saw where we're regulating the wrong body. If a woman has sex with 100 people, she'll still only have one pregnancy in a year. If a man has sex with 100 people, he can have up to 100 children. So we're regulating the wrong body. Okay. Get over there.
Well,
I think we'll have to go the other way.
yeah, that would be good.
Yeah. That's why I went that way.
Hi, Shay.
Hi there. I'm Shay Schwalberg. I'm a previous Washington State legislator, and a retired physician. Hats off to you. Thank you so much for being here and for all your information. I wish that there were a lot more people here younger than us, though, and so we have work to do. I wanted to mention a couple of things that complement some of the things you said. There is some good news out there, right? Maine just passed a law, the governor just signed it, that will permit nurse practitioners, physician assistants, and other paramedical trained and qualified personnel to provide abortions. I think it's a great roadmap, and I hope that Washington State will take that up. I'd like to know whether you know if that's in the works. That's one thing. Secondly, King County in 2017 passed an ordinance, county level, that prohibits crisis pregnancy centers from calling themselves health clinics. Again, I would love to see that at the state level. And then lastly, the sex education bill that didn't pass this year. In 2007, I was the prime sponsor of the Youth Health Care Act, which provided for medically accurate sex education. We had a tough time passing it then, but we said, if you're going to teach it, you better make it data-driven and medically accurate. What this year's bill did that was different, as you pointed out, is it changed it from being optional to be taught to mandatory teaching. And I just want to reinforce what you've told us. We need to lean on our legislators. You really need to email them, call their offices, talk to your friends who live in other legislative districts. I happen to live in the 10th LD because I live on the other end of the island. So we need to really lean on people and ask them when it comes up for election time, where do you stand? And let them know that if they don't stand where you want them to stand, you're going to be working for their opponent, especially in 2020, because this is going to be a great year for Democrats, for pro-choice Democrats. It is a great time to lean on anyone who isn't going to stand with us. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for serving in the legislature. Thank you for sponsoring the Healthy Youth Act. I know all about that bill. Super cool. And so to answer a few of your questions about decriminalizing abortion, for one. So the bill that passed in Maine, and I think there's been ones in Illinois and Oregon just passed one, is basically doing the complete opposite of what Alabama and Missouri are doing, which is saying abortion will not be criminalized. No one is going to jail for performing or receiving an abortion. Super important. And I will say that that bill that I mentioned where Roe versus Wade was codified into our state law, it had a really important clause that said, abortion performed by a doctor is protected under this right. And I'm paraphrasing here, don't quote me. But that was true back in the early 90s. But the nature of abortion care has somewhat changed, where many abortions are medical, where you take a pill that induces a miscarriage and you get to go home and be in the safety of your home, be in the comfort of your home. And that's where the abortion happens. And so it's essentially you're taking the pill yourself. So it's not a doctor giving it to you. So theoretically, under that law, someone who gives themselves an abortion, if Roe versus Wade is overturned federally, could be persecuted in our state. So that's one thing that NARAL is really excited about, taking that little abortion by a provider line out and saying any abortion, period. And that also protects miscarriages. 1 in 5 women will have a miscarriage in her lifetime. And in states that have rolled back abortion rights, women are being criminalized for having miscarriages, which if you've had one, you know there's nothing you can do about it. We don't even know what causes them half the time. So it's completely backwards. And decriminalizing abortion protects everyone who can become pregnant. So that's definitely something we're going to try to push next year. And hopefully if you sign up for the newsletter, you'll get all the details once that comes to the table. The crisis pregnancy ordinance in King County. So that's what I mentioned before, that the crisis pregnancy centers took to the Supreme Court and said that it was a free speech violation. So unless a city has a lot of money to invest in litigation, it's not advised to propose that at the city or state level. Who knows? Attorney General Bob Ferguson has done some amazing things with litigation under this administration, so maybe we need to ask him. But yeah, I'm still working on digging into policy to see how we hold them accountable, and I think spreading positive information about the real resources that exist in the meantime is a great way to resist. So thank you.
Anybody else?
Jim Taylor, Lenore's husband. At any rate, nobody's talked about the birth after the day after the mistake. After, what do they call it? After
Emergency contraception, day after pill.
Yeah, day after pill, that's
Yep.
what I'm looking for. Does that fit into your organization?
Yeah, definitely. We are huge supporters of emergency contraception, pills you can take within 72 hours after sex to prevent pregnancy. That is covered with the Reproductive Parity Act I talked about that we passed at the state level last year. Emergency contraception is covered. So if you are on a Washington state health plan, you can actually get emergency contraception day of with no prescription, with no copay as a result of that legislation. Pretty awesome. Yeah.
Who else?
Should I call on people?
And I have a follow-up.
Sarah, yeah.
Just I'll show them, Sarah.
Of course.
Can the pharmacist refuse to fill those prescriptions? Those day after fill?
That's a good question. I might have to come back to you on that. I think the individual can refuse because that falls into the same sort of religious freedom clause that the Catholic hospital issue is umbrellaed under. But I might have to get back to you on the specifics.
Okay.
Yeah, I will make a note and email it to Corinne and she can distribute.
Just a point of information about the crisis pregnancy. Not only will they try to talk the person out of it, but they will not release the results of the test for them to take somewhere else. So some young person or older person needs to know that the test that she gets will not be available to her should she need it.
She has to retake it if she goes somewhere else and make it hard at every turn.
One more thing.
Morgan, I've never stepped into a crisis pregnancy center, okay? But it was my understanding that a few years ago, they started doing ultrasound. And you didn't mention that in your earlier presentation. I think that's very important because they use that ultrasound as a tool. Okay, you might want to comment about that.
Yeah, you are 100% correct. Thank you. So if you go up to Bellingham, State Street, one of the main drags that runs parallel to the bay, has 3 crisis pregnancy centers in a 4-block stretch. And one of them has started advertising free ultrasounds on Craigslist. So that's the online bartering garage sale website. Yeah, ultrasounds are a service that they've started providing, and they'll say it's for free. And these are nonprofit organizations, so they're getting tax write-offs on buying an ultrasound machine. And they have wealthy church sponsors who would rather put money into their pro-birth agenda than actually helping kids. So they buy these ultrasound machines and they teach volunteers how to use them. And I want to be clear, some crisis pregnancy centers have an RN or a CMA on staff, but it's rare. And so these are untrained not medical professionals performing ultrasounds on humans. Seems kind of wrong. And yeah, like Marshall said, they use the images to coerce and bully, intimidate women.
Anybody else who wants to have our last question? No, I think we're done. Let's thank our speaker.